Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's session, DLP and Insider Risk Horror Stories, What Keeps Security Teams Up at Night. I'm Pauline Marguet, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. We have attendees joining from multiple regions, so wherever you're dialing in from, welcome and thank you for joining us. We'll wait for about a minute before kicking this webinar off so that more people can join. For those of you, joining us, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Safetica and CYPFER webinar, DLP Insider Risk Horror Stories, What Keeps Security Teams Up at Night. We will give a little time for people to join the webinar and we will get started. Give it another minute. All right, it is 10:02 on the Pacific Coast. It's 1:02 on the East Coast. A few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and you will be able to go back to it on demand at your convenience. The link will be sent in the follow-up emails. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to type in your questions and we will address them during the Q&A portion of the event. Before we get started, a quick introduction. John, do you want to move to the slide? Who is Safetica? Safetica is a global leader in intelligent data security. Its AI-powered platform helps organizations protect sensitive data, reduce insider risk, and stay compliant across both on-prem and cloud environments without disrupting how people work. Safetica protects over 1 million devices across over 120 countries and is supported by a global partner ecosystem. Who is CYPFER? So today's session is co-presented with CYPFER. CYPFER specializes in incident response, digital forensics, and e-discovery. They're often brought in after an incident to uncover what happened and what data was involved and what the legal and regulatory exposure looks like. That perspective, seeing incident from the inside out, is exactly why this conversation matters. Moving on to next slide, John. So your speaker today are Eva Paz Moncloa. She's the Vice President of Project Management at CYPFER, and Eva specializes in e-discovery. So she steps in when a problem has occurred and looks at the damage. And then on the Safetica side, we have John Paste, our beloved sales engineer. They'll be walking us through real-world scenario security teams encounter far more often than most organizations expect. With that, let's get into the horror DLP and IRM stories. Horror story number one, the trusted employee who left with the company. Now, this first scenario starts quickly. An employee leaves on good terms, no alerts, no obvious red flags. Then a competitor's offerings start to look very familiar. This is a classic example of insider risk that doesn't look like an attack. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Eva and John.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. As you mentioned, these are real stories, issues that we have seen. This first horror story was indeed a client reached out to us to first start doing forensic analysis of the devices of this employee that had never given any indication that there was anything wrong. The legal action, like legal counsel was involved, and we confiscated laptops, phones. The ex-employee was very collaborative. When we started doing the investigation and looking for everything that we could find, one of the main questions that came up that made this whole thing the hardest to address was they needed to understand if their intellectual property had been exfiltrated or taken, their code, their main core knowledge, and trying to identify that, not knowing where it was, what exactly it encompassed of, was the biggest challenge. So we performed the forensic analysis, we found everything we could. After that, we even went ahead and did an e-discovery data mining efforts to try to identify, defining the keywords, defining the search protocols, anything that we could determine that could help them determine if there were any indications on how the data may have left the environment, right? Emails, screenshots, it could be anything. But on top of all those unknowns, it was like, what is this data? What exactly are we looking for? How do we define that? And the company did not have that defined. This is my IP. This is how I protect it. I know where it is. I know what it looks like, and I know who can access it and where it can go. That didn't exist. So you have here, which was heartbreaking in a way, was you had a company, a small company that had worked really hard on their IP, knowing that to them, it was very easy to see that somebody was using their content, their intellectual property, struggling how to find the right information and keywords to prove that that was the case, right? Because it was not managed properly before that. We did work with them. We did a discovery. We did the forensic analysis. And of course, we look at firewalls, logs, anything that could help us. But even though once we achieved everything and got results for everything that we were looking for, a very big effort on their side was needed, because they needed to manually review every finding to create that assessment and determine, yes, this is IP, this is not IP, this is where it was supposed to be or go, or no, it wasn't. So the efforts just to prove their case and have a sound case to bring to litigation, it was very expensive for them to get there, right? So the main message here is like, even though you trust your team, you need to create controls. You need to define what is your IP, where it is at, because otherwise it can become a very expensive thing just to get the information you require to prove that you need to be protected. So it was very hard for them.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like it's so much work as well to deal with all of this after the fact. Like if you were to have had some, some information at least to begin with, I'm sure it would have made your guys' job so much easier to, dig through the data to figure out really what happened, when it happened, what kind of data was taken, and all of this. This is going to be a theme throughout this webinar, but these things are not the most unusual. We do see this, of course, from time to time, whether it is something like either code being taken, or it could be some designs being taken from an organization, or whatever it might be. And more often than not, this is why somebody does come to an organization like Safetica or CYPHER to either figure out what happened, either in terms of the CYPHER case or for Safetica, to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, or mitigate that as much as possible by classifying the information, locking it down, logging all the different controls, or kind of map what had happened or where the different data could be going, and so on and so forth. So there are ways to mitigate this sort of thing, but it does take some planning, some thought initially to get this up and running. And sometimes organizations don't necessarily want to deal with that. They'll maybe make it it's a later us problem, but at some point something will happen. Unfortunately, that is just how it goes, and it is always
when you find out. Yeah.
To be prepared. But
yeah.
Thank you both. Moving on to horror story number 2. We don't have PII until discovery proves otherwise. Now, this next story highlights a common assumption. An organization believes that they don't store sensitive personal data until an incident forces discovery to prove otherwise. What's uncovered often changes the scope of the risk entirely. Eva, John?
Thank you. Unfortunately, this is not the case of one of our clients. It is a very, very common situation on most clients that we get that have an incident. Data is exfiltrated, and then they're required to do an e-discovery. As a lot of people know, in North America, we do have the we need to notify, it's mandatory to notify people impacted. So then as soon as it is identified that there is data exfiltration, we need to figure out what is that data? Are there people impacted? Is there PII? Is there PCI, HI, and so forth? So we do need to go through it. Also, another issue is people think you have a ransomware incident, you get encrypted, that is just the extent of the cost, right? They think, oh, I have my backups, I can restore, go back to operations, everything's great. But that's not where it ends, right? You have these obligations legally. And unfortunately, it is most attacks that involve ransomware also involve data exfiltration. The threat actors are in your environment, and the last thing you see is that ransomware attack. They are taking data, they are collecting information, they are very selective with what they take, and they aim for what could be the hardest thing for you to face if it comes out, which is PII and confidential information. So in these cases, when it happens and we identify, okay, so there's exfiltration, what do we do? Oh, there's old file servers, that were supposed to be demoted or taken offline, but they were never never taken away, or they remain online for some reason. And then what is in there? We have users. We have, companies don't understand what users do with their file server storage or their laptops. They all have lives. They all use, for some reason or another, the devices for daily situations, to work with clients, to work with employees, to work with. So very often, when we talk to them, okay, so what do you think was in this file server? Like, oh, just accounting information or maybe payroll, but that's it. And more often than not, unfortunately, we do find passports, driver licenses, medical data. Like I am claiming something, so I have to submit my claims and my information. Therefore, all my PHI is there. I need to travel. I need to book something. I have those IDs in there. So it is very common to find PII, PCI not as common, and PHI as well in any discovery that we do, unfortunately, as much as people say no, because people use, their devices. So controlling that is very hard if there's no visibility to what's in there. And it's heartbreaking, or to see the faces when we say, hey, we found like X amount of passports, we found X amount of driver licenses, and then they have to notify. So the message here that I want to give is an incident cost. The cost of an incident is not only the recovery and the incident response side of things, how they got in, contained, back to operations, but it goes beyond. And the less control we have of what our users do and do with their data and what kind of data we possess makes that cost exponential and beyond just a recovery.
Yeah, and I mean, we also see this a lot for the, oh, we don't have sensitive data, or oh, it's fine. our users never, well, they never take data onto their endpoints. This is something that it is way more common than one would think. And it, it can be maybe nothing that special in terms of sensitive information. It could just be a few internal documents here or there, which that happens from time to time, but it can also be a whole lot of sensitive information depending on what the organization, specifically deals with. We've spoken with a lot of folks, maybe it's some payment processor organization. Naturally, they deal with PCI DSS for, credit cards and all that. And oh no, all of our data is stored in SharePoint, or all of our data is stored on the file server, or all of our data is wherever else, just not on the endpoint. But when you do install something like Safetica, for example, on an endpoint, we would start to look and kind of uncover what data is just residing on the machines. And maybe somebody downloaded some data off of SharePoint at one point or another. They didn't have a good internet connection. They wanted to download it offline, work on it, and then either upload it again or do something with it. And as I'm sure most folks are aware and are using on a daily basis, your downloads or documents folder is just going to be filled with a whole bunch of things, which you probably haven't gone through and cleaned in a very long time. And this is what happens. People download stuff to work on, or they download it for one reason or another and just kind of forget about it.
And just leave it
sitting there. Exactly. And you don't know unless you either you dig through it manually, you have something like a solution like Safetica that digs through it for you, or something happens, then after the fact you call somebody like CYPFER to say, help me, what happened? and then it's, this whole thing starts. So yeah, you don't know what you don't know until something either happens or you get proactive about it and you want to understand like what's going on and have that data.
Exactly. The most awareness you can have, the better response you can have as well.
Exactly. And it's going to cost you less money probably in the end as well.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Let's now move to horror story number 3. I think that's one of my favorites. The USB explosion. This scenario is about something very ordinary, USB devices. They're familiar, they're widely used, and unfortunately, very often, more often than not, overlooked. When visibility is missing, data doesn't always leave through the cloud. Sometimes it just walks out in somebody's pocket. Eva and John, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this is kind of one of those stories that I hope we only find once.
Yeah,
but we did find it. It's a real story. It was a large company that suffered a partial ransomware attack, so they were not entirely down, but it was enough. The impact was enough that they needed support and they needed a very strong containment measures to ensure that everything was controlled. They could not stop production. So we went on site and we had to work really closely with their IT team to ensure that we were contained so we can start recovering. One of the things that we do as part of our processes, of course, we deploy EDR. We start monitoring all activity to ensure that there's no nothing is threatening the progress of the recovery, and then there's no malware anywhere. They need to remain secure and safe for us to start recovering. As we were working with them and everything was very tight and controlled, we started receiving alerts, tons of alerts one day. And then, of course, our team ran to it, started identifying what is the source of the alerts, what is happening. And we identified one workstation within the IT department that had all these alerts about not very safe websites. Let's put it that way. And as we were analyzing all these alerts and then we started seeing that before we got engaged, these alerts were common. They kept happening and coming up from this same workstation. When we talked to the IT department, they're like, yeah, we're used to those, so we turn them off and we don't do anything. We're like, first layer of let's do something. The team started doing further investigation on the alerts and identified that as part of all this happening, this workstation had downloaded not safe content into possibly 50 plus USB devices, keys, that were also used as IT help desk devices. So the person that worked on this workstation also was one of those team members that had to go around the organization when somebody had an issue with a hard drive or a driver or something, and they use those USB keys, some of them at least, to go help people. But they were also downloading all this unsafe content. At the time, it was a very small period of time. It sounds like a lot happened. It was, I think it was between the 24 and 48 hours that we were doing, that we identified the alerts and found what was happening, and then identified that, luckily, for some reason, and this is like, I don't know how, this was not the source of the encryption. It was not. We found patient zero somewhere else. But this could have created the risks and the issues and the controls that were skipped could have opened the risk level of this company to an nth degree. We did have to discuss with their management, create some awareness about certain controls. And one of the messages that was there, that's the part that I would really, really like to highlight here, was like, yeah, all controls and all alerts, everything is within IT. And we have to remember, IT it's just a bunch of people, right? Of all kinds of levels, young people, old people, experienced people, not so experienced people. And what we felt our job was to kind of educate a little bit that cybersecurity, like security within your organization, is not IT owned, is business owned. If there is an impact due to a cyber incident coming from outside or coming from inside, IT is not the only one that will be impacted. The operations are going to be impacted. The business is going to be impacted. So it needs to be owned. The alerts, the controls need to be seen by others than just IT to understand that impact, right? Maybe not the technical part, but it opened a lot of eyes on them on like, oh yeah, we like, how engaged should we be, right? Like, what do we need to do here? Like, how important is this? So there was 48 hours of a lot of panic in that organization for these findings. A lot of people learned a lot of lessons. But ultimately, I think the message is we can't just close our eyes and say, IT got it, like it's all good. I don't need to do anything. It's beyond that. So it was a very scary moment for them.
Yeah, and I mean, that really also shows kind of the main issues when, things are siloed. Doesn't even have to be IT, could be any other area in an organization where maybe somebody's like, well, it's not my problem, or it's not, my focus area. It doesn't really matter what part of an organization it is. But in this specific example, it falls under IT, where you would hope that they are the ones where when you get alerts, when you get something you can see going on in an environment gets brought up, they'd be like, oh yeah, we need to jump on this, because if something happens, it's on us. But if they don't, whatever, there's whatever reason it is that they're not acting on it, this is why it's so important to also just share that information to others in the environments. And this is what we also recommend, at least, when we're dealing with our clients, is don't just provision access to the solution to IT. You can also provide access to maybe the, I don't know, head of the sales team, head of the marketing team, head of whatever other team in the organization. that, maybe they need visibility into productivity. Are people working as they should be, or are they just, I don't know, playing video games on their computers all day, or whatever they might be doing, or in this case, downloading things they shouldn't be downloading onto their workstations, and then taking that data and putting it on, company USB devices, and then sharing that data or whatever may have been happening around the entire environment. And, for all anybody could have known, there could have been malware on those USB drives, and it could have been shared throughout the entire organization, and it could have brought down the entire organization just because one guy in IT was doing something a little silly. But these things can happen, and that's why, again, it's so important to spread out that visibility, so not just a singular person or a singular team has it, so others can be like, wait a second, what's going on here? Maybe they don't look at it every day, but maybe once a week, once a month, whatever, and maybe they'll notice some abnormalities, and there are definitely some red flags would show up in something like our solution. But still, the more information you have, the better, and it helps you hopefully not run into situations like this.
Yeah, the faster you catch it, the less of an impact you should have.
Exactly.
So yes, time is of the essence.
Yep, indeed.
Well, 2 words come to mind as far as I'm concerned: device control, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's now finish with the last horror story, the scanner nobody knew about. This final story, it's not about malicious intent. It's just about process. It's a routine workflow that quietly creates compliance and a discovery nightmare long before anyone realizes the risk tied to it. So I'll give it back to you, Eva and John.
Thanks, Pauline. So this case also is, it brought our efforts to a new level, in the sense that the things that may be uncovered, honestly, we think we know it all. We've done so many cases, we have a lot of experience, and yet every so often there's a case that surprises us. It's like, oh, look what we found. In this case, this was, again, it was an incident. There was a breach of data. And after investigation and all that, we were brought in to do e-discovery. It was a very large data set. There we identified notification list, all of that. Part of our process is we ingest the entire data set that may be compromised, and then we skim through it through our processes to identify, okay, so these are the ones that respond to the keywords that we're looking for, PII, PHI, whatever it is that it's defined. And then after we have that heat map of which ones are indeed responding to those keywords, then we need to collect all that data to create the notification list. Who needs to be notified, and we need to let them know what kind of data of their data was compromised. Like, hey, Pauline, you were in an incident, and we have your address, you have your phone number, whatever it was. So part of that process, time is money. There are timelines that companies have. They do need to, like when they report that there was an incident they need to notify, they do have a timeline in which they need to provide the information, how many people were impacted, etc., and when they will start notifying. So when we do all these efforts, time is of the essence. We do need to be as fast as we can, because there's a lot of work that comes after we have the notification list, right? They need to create the communications. We need to find how to protect these people, etc. So our part is just one little block of the entire path of notification to people impacted. So part of our process is identify, okay, so of all these files that we have to collect data on, some are faster than others, some are easier than others. When we have structured data like Excel's, breezy, right? We know exactly what is there, it's easy to collect. The hardest ones, the ones that are the hardest to collect and work on, are documents that need to, that are manually written because of, not everybody's legible, images, etc., that need to be OCR'd. We need to transform these images into readable material so they can be collected. So part of this case we identified when we were trying to OCR what it was available there in the data set, we started identifying very, very large PDF files. And I'm talking PDF files with 10 to 30 pages long. And we had hundreds of them that had been scanned manually, and they were in the system. These data seem to have come from some kind of application. So it was a report generated by an application, which means that the data is digitized somewhere, right? So it was digitized somewhere. Somebody generated a report, printed it, and then somebody grabbed that printout, scanned it, and brought it back into the system in the file server. When we started talking to the team about it, the client team, because we said, okay, we have to go through these manually because the quality of the scans is not very good. Therefore, not all data will be collected automatically. We need to go manually. And that means a lot of hours, a lot of money, a lot of time. And they were, when we first told them, they're like, what? Reports? From what? Long? PDF? Scanned? No, we don't have any processes like that. So we all sat down and started showing them all these documents. And their faces were, where is this coming from? Who is doing this? This is not a process we're aware of. It did not register that there somebody somewhere was doing this due diligently. And there were hundreds of them. And of course, legally, they had no choice. They had to collect. They had to go through the process. But ultimately, even though they spent all this time to notify and find out and get all the information, now they had another layer of work. Find out who's carrying out with this process, why, and how do they change it ASAP? Because if it continues to happen, this data will continue to be there on top of the original sources that, if it's in an application, will be controlled, right? So they discover a complete new process, manual process that was happening under their eyes, but nobody was aware of. And it costed them a very large amount of money and time to address because of the incident.
This is a very interesting one. This is actually one that you don't necessarily hear about so often, but no. I mean, obviously these things do happen. And a funny enough thing is when it comes to printing and stuff like this, this is something, I mean, everybody thinks about like virtual printing. If you're opening a document and making a copy by, virtual printing to PDF or whatever it might be, taking a screenshot of it, something like that. That's relatively known and, enforced for, data protection or, things along those lines. But the actual like printing off of documents is something that actually still a lot of organizations don't necessarily think about. And also a lot of products don't deal with because it's let's say somewhat of a legacy system to a degree, but it's still very important because you do still have all these documents stored either on your file servers or in the cloud or wherever it might be, and as long as somebody has an access to printer, they could just start printing off this data, and then good luck tracking it. Once it's printed, you can't, it's kind of impossible. And from that point, an even weirder aspect is people putting it back in to the system via a scanner. And again, with something like the solution of Safetica, you do have the ability to firstly, restrict the printing of sensitive documentation. So that could potentially have, made this whole event really not happen to begin with. But additionally, we can also do restrictions in terms of devices that are internal company devices or, not. So if it's an approved printer, again, that's one thing. Maybe we could print it in the company, but if you're printing off, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents in the office, somebody might be like, hey, what you doing? If you're trying to do it at home, we could then, then again, have these things restricted to, only applies on company printers. You cannot connect your, home printer either via USB or Bluetooth or wireless or whatever it might be. Just not going to happen, or any other external device for that matter. So there are ways around these things, and also when the data is coming back into the solutions, even if you don't have restrictions on these things, at least there would be data of somebody plugging in, again, that printer again, and all of this data showing up at some point on that machine, whether temporarily or not, if it's passing through, but still, there would be some records of this going on. And, you know, this would get thrown up. I mean, this is not a normal occurrence, it doesn't sound like, especially in this scenario. So this sort of a thing would definitely get flagged because it's way out of the normal. And yeah, I mean, for anybody in the environment, if they're scanning in hundreds of documents, that's just a little bit odd, and then moving them somewhere else in the environment. But this is, yeah, this is definitely a unique one. These other ones that we had talked about, they're relatively common scenarios that we come across, but something like this is definitely very odd, but very interesting to hear about nonetheless.
Yeah, and you don't know until you know, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in this case, the effort of the incident itself helped them see. Unfortunately, there was an incident. Luckily, something was found and they could do something.
Yep.
Ideally, they could have something that can tell them something like this is happening without the incident part of it.
That's the thing, exactly. You want to be aware when somebody connects that odd device or when they attempt to, you know, print something. You want to get the flag at that point and be like, hey, something weird's going on here, rather than, yeah, either after that data's just been printed off and gone who knows where, or getting scanned back in, or all of that. Yeah, you just want to avoid the whole situation if you can.
Yeah, definitely.
No.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Eva. I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's better than horror movies, I think. Those insights are really fascinating. Before we move forward, let's just pause for a couple of minutes on the key takeaways from that webinar. So across all of these scenarios, a few themes I think are consistent, right? And you can add to it at the end, you know, if you want, sorry. So you can protect what you don't know you have. This one hits hard. Visibility matters more than intent. Like we've heard a couple of times that it wasn't necessarily about intent. It only takes either one user, one device, or one workflow to create significant exposure, potential damage, and heavy costs. The incident response teams are essential, but by the time they're engaged, the damage is already done, and the consequences might be a lot more than that particular incident that needs to be fixed. So that's anything you want to share about this, Eva or John, and John?
I mean, I think one of the key things that we've said a few times here is you don't know what you don't know. And this is a whole thing about visibility. Just at least having the information as to what's going on in real time, that helps immensely. Even if you're not, you know, categorizing anything, classifying anything, even, you know, protecting whatever, just having the visibility of who's doing what, you know, when, where, all that jazz, it helps so much for everybody in the organization, not just the IT teams, but can help others to understand just what are people doing, and maybe there's things that we can, you know, streamline. Maybe people are spending too much time on this or that or whatever it might be. It's not just necessarily about data security, it could be about other things as well. But having that visibility to begin with is the key. And then you can build on from there, of course, with, you know, classifying your most sensitive information, you know, determining, of course, what that is to begin with, and then going from there. Where do I want to block things? How do I want to block things? You know, who should be allowed to do what team, what user, machine, and so on and so forth. But visibility is the key to begin with, at least.
And just to add to that, John, you're completely right. Visibility is really important. And prevention is the best remedy. Be ready, educate your team members, educate your executives. Proactive services like simulations, tabletops, pen tests, you know, try to be prepared to avoid. And phishing campaigns, anything that can allow your users to be more aware that this is not something that people talk in sci-fi movies. It is happening today, to most organizations out there, if they are exposed to the internet, you're a target. Doesn't matter how tiny you are or how big you are a target. So prevention, proactive services, visibility, awareness, it's definitely something we have to invest on.
Yeah, exactly.
Both. Let's move on to the next slide, and John, tell us more about Safetica, and then Ava, you can tell us more in detail about the CYPHER offerings.
Yeah. So just quickly on Safetica, of course, don't want to make this all about a product pitch here, but just to talk about Safetica for a quick second. I mean, the one thing that we've talked about a lot today is the visibility, right? And Safetica definitely helps organizations with that, amongst other things, as we can see here on this lovely image on the left-hand side. But Safetica it's a platform. It's a data security platform in the end. It's not simply just a data loss prevention tool or insider risk tool or whatever it might be. It is a platform that helps you do a number of different things. And it all starts with the visibility of data, and also goes out into things such as understanding who's using what applications, who's using what websites. Also goes into email security, making sure that folks are emailing data accordingly within the organization, and also externally to make sure it's not going to places that it shouldn't. External device management, talking about the printers and all of that, again, to make sure that people aren't doing weird things like this. And of course, looking at the whole insider risk monitoring side of things with these folks in IT who you hope are doing what they should be doing, but in the end, they're doing stuff that they really shouldn't. And with having something like a Safetica solution that does have, intelligence built into the platform with the help of AI, of course, we can understand what's normal, what's abnormal, and be able to flag these sort of events sooner rather than later to then, help not just IT teams, but other teams in the organization understand what's going on, and then also naturally to prevent things from occurring. But that's my quick spiel, at least for the Safetica side of things. It is one product, it is one platform of singular price for all of this as well. It's not modularized or anything like that, which also helps immensely. So yeah, single pane of glass, all that good stuff. But yeah, that's my quick spiel at least.
And on the next slide, we're giving options if people are interested to learn more in Safetica, to visit our website, to follow us on LinkedIn. You can book a demo directly on the safetica.com/demo, or if you scan this QR code, you will be taken to that demo page automatically. And for those who don't want to talk to real people, you can take a demo walkthrough on the website as well. That way you don't have to necessarily engage. You can look at the product. Moving on to CYPHER.
Thanks, Pauline. So CYPHER, I would say we are cybersecurity. We breathe cybersecurity, from proactive services and prevention and education to being there for incident response in any situation, any type of incidents. We help recovery, we help with incident response, we help with investigation, do discovery as well. At the end, it's an end-to-end one shop, I would say, for any cybersecurity needs. We are on multiple countries. We're in Europe, we're in Latam, we're in North America. We offer a lot of things that are not currently in the market, like boots on the ground. We can support remotely, we can be there if needed. You never know what kind of incident you're going to get. So if there's any curiosity of how we can help with prevention or with support, just go to cypher.com and we'll be there.
Thank you both. Now it's time to move into Q&A. So I will reiterate, please ask your questions in the box questions. We will address them right now. And we have one so far from Antonio. Antonio, thank you for asking. That's a great question. John, I think this one would be for you, and I'll read it out for you.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the early stages of standing up a DLP program, and we're currently in the discovery and classification phase. If you had to sequence the first 60 to 90 days, what would you prioritize so that we don't end up with 1 million alerts and 0 outcome?
Yeah, that's a good one. That really does vary from organization to organization, but what I think is probably the best thing to do to begin with is actually within the Safetica product, there's a section called like data destinations, and that is where you can segment your internal company environment or maybe other trusted sources where data can be sent to. That could be email domains, could be specific email addresses, could be file servers, could be URLs you're uploading data to, could be also printers, USB devices, whatever it might be. You can categorize these things in that part of the solution, and you can just put it under a blanket area, which we would call safe destinations, or you can adjust it in terms of folders if you want to create different folders for different teams or something like this. This can also work even between like team to team collaboration to make sure HR data doesn't go to, some other locations in the organization specifically. But I would say this is a really important thing and sometimes an overlooked thing when rolling out a solution such as Safetica is if you define these kind of safe areas correctly to begin with, it's going to reduce your headache immensely going forward because generally you'll roll out the product, you'll get it into production, and you'll start turning on some policies, and you're probably going to get a lot of things flagged up on the endpoints. People are going to be like, hey, why can't I do this? Why is this happening? So on and so forth. And maybe they really are trying to do something, normal business usage, but they might just be getting restricted because certain things haven't been set in that sense. So I would say that's probably one of the most important things is creating your, safe environment, your internal company environment accordingly. Similarly, we also have some other sections in the solution for managing and maintaining what we would call like business usage, non-business usage, and these sort of things. That's more for the productivity side, but still very important to be able to keep an eye on, if people are doing what they really should be doing while they're at work. And naturally, data classification is, of course, very important to begin with as well, narrowing down kind of how do we want to classify our data. And all of that. But from that point, then it heavily depends on the organization and really what they're looking to achieve. But really, I would say the beginning and most important thing is that initial configuration of zones and things like that, so that when you roll out into production, you're not getting people coming to you all day, every day. Hey, I can't do this. Hey, I can't do that. Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? And if they are doing this and you have it set correctly, well, then you have a bit of an issue and some education that may need to be done. But a bit of a long-winded answer, but hope that answered your question.
John, there was actually a second part to the question.
Yeah.
What are the first 3 use cases you'd implement to prove value fast?
First 3 use cases. Well, I mean, firstly, it's just going to be the initial deployment, really, because once it's deployed, it's going to be looking at a number of different things that are occurring on the endpoints. We do have an agent and a client that's deployed on those machines. And once we are on the endpoints, we are going to be looking at, the application usage, the web usage, the data usage on the endpoints, and all of these things, which, helps paint a picture as to what is the current reality of our environment. And a lot of folks just, you have maybe bits and pieces of that here and there, but having everything in a unified sense and a single pane of glass where you can just, click through different tabs in a singular solution, that helps immensely to just get a baseline understanding of what's going on. I would say that's probably one of the most important things is just, initially, of course, deploying it, but you get a lot of value just from the initial deployment of the solution. But then from that point, once you start to see certain things occurring on those endpoints, then it's going to go into the solution, and of course also figuring out your different classifications you have in the product and just setting up a simple block policy. And there's a few different things that can be done with the block policy, but still, having something set up for whether it's PII or PHI or, everybody has that in one which way or another in the organization. And setting up a simple restriction where you are not allowed to share PHI, to, anything else than this area. Once you see that, get flagged in the organization, I mean, that's a huge victory to know that, hey, we can actually restrict these sort of things from happening. That's fantastic. That's going to reduce our just initial exposure or overall exposure rather. And it could potentially save us a whole lot of money on fines and things like this if data were to get out. And then also, of course, you know, having things like this in place will hopefully also reduce the risk of, you know, some sort of a massive data leak, where then you would need to call in somebody like CYPFER to come help you out and figure out really what happened. But yeah, I would say these things are probably going to be the most important to get started and to see the value, of course, in the product.
Thank you, John. I am not seeing any other questions so far, but if for the attendees there is something you would like to ask, we're happy to keep this conversation going for a little bit. If nobody sends another question, then we will wrap it up. Let's just give it a little time, but if not, then we will conclude this webinar. I am not seeing anything else. Okay, well, Eva, John, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening and interesting. I hope if you have attended this webinar that you have enjoyed it and taken some information with you that is going to be valuable. I hope everyone has a beautiful day. Thank you again for your time. And the webinar will be sent as a recording in the follow-up emails. So Eva, thank you so much. John,
Thank you.
thank you again, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.